for this time together. We thank you, Father, that we get to study your word, that we get to worship you, that we get to gather, that we get to fellowship, that we get to testify of your goodness. So, Father, right now, we give this time to you, and we say, have your way. We give you all glory and honor and praise in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. We're going to go ahead and read chapter 19.
The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offering shall be burned. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet, and cast them into the midst of the fire burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes. He shall bathe in water, and afterward he shall come into the camp. The priest shall be unclean until evening. And the one who burns it shall wash his clothes in water, bathe in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water of purification. It is for purifying from sin. And the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It shall be a statute forever to the children of Israel and to the stranger who dwells among them. He who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with the water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean, because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. All who come into the tent and all who are in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel which has no cover fastened on it is unclean. Whoever in the open field touches one who is slain by a sword, or who has died, or a bone of a man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. And for an unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer burnt for purification from sin, and running water shall be put on them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent, on all the vessels, on the persons who were there, or on the one who touched a bone, the slain, the dead, or a grave. The clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And on the 7th day he shall purify himself, wash his clothes, and bathe in water. And at evening he shall be clean. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from among the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of purification has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean. It shall be a perpetual statute for them. He who sprinkles the water of purification shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water of purification shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening.
All right. Now, I'm going to ask this question. How many of you completely understand everything in this Torah portion? How many of you read it and prepared? Yes. Okay. There is a lot to get through, so we're going to barrel on ahead and see how far we can go. I hope to the end. We'll see, because there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to say about certain things. So Chukat, we're going to just give an intro of that. Chukat is the plural of hukah, and it means statute, ordinance, limit, or enactment. And it comes from the root stem of a het and a kof, which is like cutting, inscribing, engraving, to trace or make it imitate, image. So when you think about imitating or tracing something, It also has this idea of sketching or an outline of something or someone on stone or wood. So really, could this Torah portion, of course it is, but be about an ordinance sketched in the image of Torah, the written word of Yahweh, which is Yeshua?
Yes.
Because we all know the red heifer and Yeshua, that there's connection in all of it. The living water, the bread of life. We know that connection is there for every portion of this Torah portion. And the rabbis actually say this Torah portion is about vision. And as I've studied it, I would say, yes, there's a lot about vision in this Torah portion. Our vision being clear or cloudy, both yesterday, meaning back then, or today or tomorrow. So it means it's for us too. In fact, Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no vision, what does it say? The people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Okay, so let's jump right into the red heifer for a little bit and see what we can find. And guys, if you have something you want to comment, please do. Please do. Anyway, we know the slaughter of the red heifer is considered to be one of those ordinances that not necessarily everybody understands, that there's this sense of supernatural in it as well, because you're like, okay, how do ashes of a heifer cleanse? But we're going to find really that repeated theme throughout the Torah, actually, because we see that in other areas too, things that bring these same elements in. And we'll talk about that. But we have this sprinkling of this ash and water, and it purified those it touched. But what did it do to those that were administering it? It defiled them. So isn't that odd?
Yes.
It cleanses one and it defiles the other. According to the sages, from Moshe to the destruction of the second temple, there were nine red heifers.
Wow.
So from Moshe to the second temple's destruction, there were 9. But I dare say there was a 10th red heifer. Now, the Gemara, it states that the ash and the water mixture was still in use 200 years after the last ceremony in 70 CE. Think about that. It was such a preservative that it was still in use and still useful, still pure, still being able to use 200 years after the temple was destroyed.
Wow.
They also believe, the sages believe, that the Messiah, now remember, they don't consider Yeshua, but they believe the Messiah would prepare the 10th mixture for the nation. Well, I dare say he did, because the red heifer was designed as a hatat, or a sin offering, or a purification offering, and it brought atonement for an inadvertent sin, but it also was important in the aspect that the offering was that it was slaughtered and totally consumed by what? By fire outside the camp. Now, the 10th heifer. If 9 heifers had already come, we know that Moshe prepared the first heifer. Moses prepared the first heifer. We know that the second was by Ezra, and then there were 7 others prepared from Ezra until the temple's destruction. And the 10th red heifer will be the Messiah. Well, we've already had the Messiah. Messiah is Yeshua, right?
Yeah.
So there's this promise that's given to Israel that is believed to depend upon the ashes of the red heifer. And it's in Ezekiel 36, verses 25 through 26. And it says, then I shall sprinkle pure waters upon you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanness, and from all your idols will I cleanse you. I will also give you a new heart, and I will place it within you a new spirit. Okay, if you hear about waters that are purified, what are you immediately going to think of? The waters of the red heifer, the ones that are purification, that remove all uncleanness. Maimonides actually said the 10th red heifer will be accomplished by the king, the Messiah. May he be revealed speedily. Well, when Maimonides wrote that, he was already revealed. His eyes were blind. Because remember, this Torah portion is about vision. Can we see? Do we know? Do we understand who the Messiah is? Do we understand what this is trying to tell us? So we don't repeat the same mistakes as our fathers have repeated. Okay, outside the camp. What does outside the camp mean to you? Pretty simple, right? Outside the camp. It was important to understand this principle to the life of Israel, to the life of it as a nation. Inside the camp was what? Was where the presence of God was, the Shekinah. So that means outside the camp, there was no presence, or outside the camp was the place of defilement. Outside the camp was the impurity and even death. It makes me think, if inside the camp is where his presence is, then I think of him reigning with us. Inside the camp, we reign with him. Outside, there's death. Inside the camp, there's life. It is said that eternal torment is about being without the presence of God. Can you imagine? Would you ever want to even exist 1 minute without his presence?
No.
I don't. The red heifer must have contained a degree of impurity that threatened the holy sanctuary, because where was it offered? Outside the camp. It was offered on the Mount of Olives. So many say that is actually where Yeshua was crucified, was on the Mount of Olives. Coincidence? I think not, because we know Yeshua is a picture of the red heifer, and he took on flesh. He took on sin and was crucified at the stake, or on the cross outside of the camp. This concept of exile has come to be associated with this contamination or impurity. Okay, but we're in exile, right? Are we in the wilderness? Yeah. Israel was removed from the land and sent to the nations. Why? Why was it Israel spread out?
Because of disobedience.
Disobedience. They weren't walking the walk. They weren't talking the talk.
They
were hanging out with the wrong people.
They weren't true to the bridegroom.
They weren't true to the bridegroom. Very good. And what happened? Did that cause them to be impure?
Yes.
So what happened to them? They were removed and put outside the camp. That brings me back to this idea where people say, I just want to get in the kingdom. I don't care if I'm close. I'm like, nope. I want to be right there as close as I can be to Yeshua.
Yes.
I don't want to be on the other side of the fence or at the tail end of the garden. What?
Looking in.
Looking in? No.
I'm tired of being separated from him.
Okay.
Physically.
Oh, yeah. Now.
It shows. One of y'all wanted to be with him today. You're here.
You're here. That's right. Now, with the red heifer, we see that it's just a cow, right? It's just a cow. And it could have not have more than how many white hairs on it? Does anybody know? Two. It had to be completely red. And so each time the red heifer needed to be sacrificed, they actually built a bridge, supposedly a 3-tiered bridge that crossed the Kidron Valley, so that things could be seen. But what were the elements that the red heifer carried with it, of the ceremony, the elements that were used? Can anybody tell me? The hyssop, the scarlet, and the cedar.
Cedar.
Yes. Okay, hyssop and scarlet and cedar. Okay, the scarlet. When you think of scarlet, what do you think of?
Scarlet
Blood.
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 I
Okay.
think of
Blood.
the red tie on the.
It goes back, when you think of scarlet and blood, it goes back to this idea of Pesach, where the blood was what? Sprinkled upon the lintels and the doorpost, or with what? The hyssop. And maybe if that's the case, Pesach we have, which is Passover, we have scarlet. Do we have hyssop? Yes, because that's what was used. Do we have cedar?
Probably in the door.
What if the doors were cedar? I can't tell you if they were or not. But what if they were? All of a sudden, over at Passover, we have these very same elements that we can look at and say, hey, the red heifer and Passover are connected. But it's also interesting that the blood of our Messiah is also That's scarlet, right? We have this idea that this messenger of death hops or passes by the house with the blood applied, the house with the scarlet and the cedar, the house with that had the hyssop. Well, we have that same idea with Yeshua, right? The blood of Yeshua applied to the doorposts of our heart, applied to our heart. Okay? So the one who fails to be cleansed by the waters of purification because they're unclean is cut off. The one who fails to apply the blood to their doorposts with the hyssop and have the cedar, what happens? That the angel of death or the messenger of death came upon them back all those years ago during the plagues. All right. I'm looking at with Coy and Bob and Peaceful Warrior and Nancy. Hi, everybody. We've got more in there. I'm so glad to have you here. So in the book of Leviticus, in chapter 14, verses 1 through 7, guess what we see? These very same elements. The elements of what? Hyssop, cedar, and scarlet are used. Why are they used in Leviticus chapter 14? Does anybody remember?
Zahara.
Exactly. Leprosy. For the leper. These very same elements are used for the process of cleansing Zarat, the leper, the Mesorah. Hebrews 9:19. Let's read that. Hebrews 9:19. Somebody's there. Would you read it out loud for me? That would be great. Hebrews 9:19.
For when Moses had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and of goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book and all the people.
Okay. Do we hear some repetitive things here? Brought all the way into the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. How could anyone who reads the New Testament without going back and understanding the cedar, the hyssop, the blood, the pure waters of purification, how could they even understand what that means? You can't.
I don't think it can.
You can't. The red heifer in its ritual formulation is connected to Passover. It's connected to Pesach. It's connected of cleansing people from Zaharat, from that uncleanness. This red heifer, this whole thing is about bringing Yah's people into a covenant of the Torah. It's bringing Israel in and receiving Yeshua as our Pesach lamb, because he is the one. He is the one that brings forth life and atones us with his blood. And he passes, and the messenger of death passes us by. He is the one who cleanses each and every one of us that's affected by uncleanness and leprosy, Zaharat. And we see it many times where Yeshua healed the people and he cleanses them. He makes them whole. He connects them to the covenant. Okay, these ashes, we understand that they're mixed with water and they had to be placed in newly hewn spot on the rocky hillside for how many days? Does anybody remember?
It says.
It does. Just off the top of your head, since we have a connection to Yeshua, how many days do you think it would be since there's a connection?
Probably 3 weeks.
It's 3 days. Surprise, surprise.
Well, I had read it earlier.
But we see this connection everywhere. It's fulfilled. It's repeated. God, it's so amazing. Can you imagine starting something, having this plan, and however many thousand years later, you're still fulfilling it and repeating it, and then several thousand years later, you do it again and again and again?
When you said earlier about the water and how long it had lasted, how long did you say?
It's said it lasted 200 years.
Okay, but just picture this. Here's this jug of precious wine and it's sealed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sits there. Do you know it would be evaporated, even with the seal on it? It just would.
Well, it makes me think of the blood that was discovered over out
By Ron Wyatt.
by Ron Wyatt, Yeshua's blood that's still alive. When they looked at it under a microscope and they scraped it off the ark, that that blood was still alive. Now, blood dies when it hits, it's dead. You bleed, the blood it's dead. But the blood, when they looked at it, the scientists, they weren't quote unquote Hebrew roots or Christians or anything like that, but they said, this blood is alive, how can that be? And then of course it had one chromosome less and things like that, and that's a whole nother thing. You can watch the video on that. But after how many years and the blood was alive, after how many years and the water purification was still working? Y'all's amazing.
Amen.
So if it was 3 days that had to be on the hillside, we also know that there was 3 days and 3 nights that our Messiah was in the grave. The heifer had to be mixed with hyssop and scarlet and cedar and cedar wood when it was sacrificed. It is said that they sort of wrapped them together. I'm not quite sure how that was done. But also, if you want a connection, what color was the robe? They say it was scarlet. Some say it was scarlet robe that he had to wear when he was being mocked. And then there was hyssop at the crucifixion site. And then what kind of beam? He was probably nailed to a cedar beam.
Cedar beam.
Now, I've heard some teachings where it's the fig tree, but,
Fig trees are rather small, and
they are smaller.
and they don't have
much
big,
smaller.
strong branches.
And cedar is big.
Cedar's too.
And it's hard, it's a hard wood.
That's true. That's true. So what happens finally? They take the ashes of the red heifer and they mix it with the water. And what do they do with it? They put it in jars and store it in a clean place. Now, I already told you that once the heifer was slaughtered, it was completely burned. But before the mixing, the ashes were divided into 3 portions. One portion was kept in the Pel next to the wall of the courtyard for safekeeping for when the Messiah returns. Another portion was stored on the Mount of Olives, later known as the Kohanim, by the use of the Kohanim. And the third portion was divided among the 24 courses of the priest. Okay, there you go. There's some trivia if you didn't need to know it, but there's always a purpose and a reason behind everything. So can anybody tell me what the name of this water was called? It's the water of separation. The waters of separation, the waters of the sin offering. In Hebrew, it's called menadah, and it's the same word, if you think about that, that's used for the woman who's separated out of the community for her monthly cycle. She's in nadah, right? In a nadah state. So a very small amount of sifted ash was put in the water, and an individual was sprinkled once on the 3rd day and once on the 7th day for if you had touched a dead body, and over the course of a 7-day period. So this sprinkling of the ash and water mixture, you see it sort of as this precursor for Messiah's return, that ingathering of all the exiles to the land. The resurrection of the dead. Think about that. Resurrection of the dead. Zechariah 13:1 says, on that day, there will be a spring opened up for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for cleansing and for purification. Why? Because we just came out of an unclean state, for sure, right? Think about that. John 11:55 says the Judean festival of Pesach was near, and many people went up from the country to Jerusalem to perform the purification ceremony prior to Pesach. Now, this para Adama, I want to go ahead and look at it a little bit more closely.
What
And I know this-
scripture in Zechariah?
13:1. It's on your notes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on your notes. So, para, number H6510. It means, of course, heifer. But guess what else it can mean? Of course, that's in your notes. It can also mean fruit that has been released, fruit that has been unbound. When I think of something being unbound, I think about the hair of the woman, the hair of the harlot that's been designated for her husband, and it's unbound. Think of the sotah. Remember that her hair is unbound at that point as well. Now let's look at Adama. What word is within Adama that you hear?
Adam.
Adam. Yes. So we hear this word Adam, but here it says Adama. Now, Adam comes, or red, like ADOM, comes from H122. But in this text, it's spelled Adamah, which means the ground. Now, if I think of Adam and the ground, what does that immediately take us back to?
We were created from the dust of the
Genesis,
earth.
the beginning, absolutely. The place where the first man, the first seed, the first human, because that's what we need to look at, human, comes from, originates. And it speaks euphemistically of the Torah. It speaks euphemistically of the word of Yah. And if we're talking about the Torah or the word, what is that? That's Yeshua. Because the place where the seed comes from. And if we also remember, it was the mist from the earth that watered the ground. When was the first time it rained?
The flood.
The flood. It had never rained on the earth before the flood because the earth was such that it kept the perfect moisture in the air, the perfect everything to feed and supply all that was needed. That must have been amazing. I've read before and I've said it before. It is said that a man could run 200 miles and it was nothing because your muscles never atrophied. Things were just such that it was this perfect place. Now, can we imagine that? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Absolutely. So if mist is important here, Genesis 2:6 says, but there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Adamah. So mist. Let's think about mist. Because what we have,
It's not mist, it's dew, but.
dew,
Yeah.
mist, yeah. What we have is the dust or the ashes of the earth mingled with dew, mist, water. Okay, that word is ED, H number 108. It's in your notes. And it does mean a vapor, mist, water, something exhale. Okay, think about exhaling the water of the word, exhaling the word, the spoken word. Now, the same two-letter root, I know we're getting into the Hebrew, but because we're doing it because there's treasures inside. So this same two-letter root, aleph, dalet, is the same thing that's seen in Adamah. We have an aleph and a dalet in Adam, or Adamah, the ground. Now, what happened in the garden at the beginning, as Janet said? Remember the word that we talked about at the beginning that was about making an image or an etching? What we have in the ground, that it was the first place where the image or the Torah or the ordinance of Torah or the ritual red heifer, hara adamah, was shown. Because it flowed freely through the garden, watering, cleansing, and bringing life. Because why do I say that? Because we said Adam or Dom means red, A-D-O-M. Okay. And we have the earth, the dust mixed with water, and the mist of the earth, which we see there in Genesis 2:6. And then we also see that there was the image of Yah, the image of the Torah, right there at the very beginning. So we can't say that with these words that it doesn't bring us back to different areas of the Torah, different areas of the word. And if it brings us back there, if there's an echo of something, then there's a connection there. There's this connection we need to look at. Now, dust is the word afar, A-P-H-A-R. I do not know if I put that one in there for you.
It is.
It is? Okay. And guess what it's the same word for? Ashes. So now we have ashes and dust being mixed with the water that make the man, the human. Do you see how we have these same sort of things coming together at the very beginning? We have two references to the red heifer linked together at the creation of Gan Eden, at the Garden of Eden. So it shows us that Adam, and when we say Adam, it's talking about the human, guys, was the etching, the image of Yehovah, and was supposed to be the cleansing agent of the earth. Now, how could Adam be a cleansing agent? Can anybody tell me? Because what are we supposed to do? What was he supposed to do? He was supposed to speak forth the word of Yah, speak forth the Torah, speak forth that word, and it would be superimposed on his heart by the breath of the living water cleansing him. He was supposed to subdue and take dominion, right? He had this job as the red heifer to bring life where there was once death. Has his job changed from our job?
No.
If we are being conformed to his image too, then we have to function as the paradama. We have to function as the thing that brings life where there is death. That means where we go, light should overtake and darkness should be subdued. I think of Peter's shadow. When he walked, we see in the New Testament, when he walked, what would happen as his shadow passed somebody?
People were healed.
People were healed. He was changing the apostles, and many since and before were acting as that agent that cleansed what was purified. Now, am I saying they were the cleanser? No. But I'm saying through Yeshua, through his blood, through his word, Yeshua is still the red heifer. Yeshua is still the one that brings forth life. But if he is the head and we are the body, are we not part of that? Doesn't he give us a role to play in that?
Yes.
I've never seen a head function on its own, just a head. Can it walk any place? Can it do anything? No, it takes arms and legs. It takes us. He's given us this role to say, hey, I want you to partner with me. Could he do everything on his own without one of us?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. But he says, you know what? I want you to partner with me. What happens when we get to participate in something? It makes it more real to us. It makes it more meaningful to us. It brings better understanding of what we're learning and what we're growing. It gives us this picture. I know when I always tell people, like if we scholarship somebody for something, like for Sukkot or something, I say, we'll scholarship, but we're not going to pay the whole thing. We want them to pay a little bit. You know why?
Because they're invested in it.
Because when you're invested in something, it means more. It's more important. When you are when you are participating in something instead of watching, does it have more meaning?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you are listening to the Torah,
Even a child, if you give them a toy totally, they'll leave it. They don't care. But if they paid for part of it themselves and worked for it,
they're going to take a lot better.
they're going to take a lot. I mean, that's my toy.
That's right.
They take on it.
Just as I said that Adam, the human, was supposed to speak forth the word of Yahweh, because Yeshua is the cleansing agent. That is what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to be cleansing ourselves and those around us in the circumstances with the sprinkling of the water of the word, the cleansing. Without that word in us, guess what happens? There is no vision, and we perish. The people perish. We don't get the word out. Y'all can use somebody else, but he's wanting us to participate. And it makes me think of a skit that we've done here at Life of Worship years ago. And it was Joy's kids. It was Embry and Killian that had done it. We need to do it again because it's pretty. And Jonathan. Jonathan was also in it. And somebody else. Jenny. Oh, yeah. Jenny was in there too. And it's a skit where these two girls are in this car and they die in a wreck. And one goes to heaven, or you know what I'm saying, and one goes to hell. I'm just giving the simplistic picture here. And the one she sees whatever's approaching, death and darkness approaching, and the other one sees the light. And the girl in the darkness is like, that sees the demonic coming. She says, why didn't you tell me? Where are you going? Well, why didn't you tell me about it? Why didn't you show me? Why didn't you use your words? And of course, the excuses were, well, you might have rejected me, or you might have been offended, or it just didn't seem like the right moment, the right time. And so one was taken to hell and one wasn't. One was taken to heaven. In that skit, did the believer act as a cleansing agent at all? No. She felt that she didn't do her part.
She didn't.
I would hate to be this is one thing that I don't want to happen, is when our time is done, when my time is done, and your life is everything is played in front, and you say, Sandy, see, you should have opened your mouth there. You should have said something. You should have demonstrated this. See, they went over here and they had this many more years of walking, or maybe they never came to know Yeshua, or because you didn't step in where you were supposed to step in. Would that be heartbreaking for you guys?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So here, without us, without that word in us, the people perish. That's a pretty grave statement of responsibility. Without us, the people perish. That mixture of the ash, the afar, the dust, and the water could also point to Adam's creation, which we talked about, who y'all breathed into, That same purification is received through faith through the work of Yeshua. Colossians 3:10. For time, I'm just going to read it. It says, put on new man who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. And then we have Ephesians 4:24. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to Yah in true righteousness and holiness. Okay, so let's go back to the original usage, one of the usages of this, and that's about contact with dead people. Can I ask you a question? Are you in contact with dead people?
The Walking Dead.
Are you in contact with dead
The
people?
Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
Yes, we are. There's death all around us. There's death. We have a culture of death, a culture that glorifies death, that glorifies the process of death.
But we don't want to embrace that.
We don't want to embrace it, Carlos.
You know what I heard with my friend that I'm doing Bible study with? He told me that the people that are going to hell are experiencing heaven here in earth, and those that are like us, those that will go to heaven are experiencing hell here in earth. I don't know if you understand that.
I do understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it,
Yeah,
but I do understand where he's going with that.
yeah. It was a good understanding for me.
Yeah.
Like visuals, that's the way I learned. And I was like amazing.
Because the people that are going to hell are experiencing the very best of what they'll ever see.
Yeah,
But we are experiencing the very worst of what we'll ever see.
yes.
Can you compare our walk here with hell? No. Can you compare this to heaven? Or okay, when I say heaven here, I'm just doing it for simplicity. I know, guys. I know paradise. I know all that. Just for simplicity. So don't throw rocks at me, okay?
Wasn't the guy that died and looked back, Abraham or whatever, he's not the Abraham, that looked back across the gulch, didn't God
Rich man.
explain to him that he received his all now?
Lazarus.
And, I mean, the same thing that Carlos was saying.
Yes, you already experienced your best. It reminds me of sometimes the people and when you're growing, they give you encouragement by saying, those people that are so popular in high school, they're experiencing the best of whatever they have. The ones that didn't get it are going to experience that later. That has no play except that it sort of references what you're saying here is that they're experiencing the best that they have. Because the biggest thing is we are walking around in a culture of death. And the red heifer became the ultimate vision test. Many of the sages have failed to see Yahweh, even though he was revealed in the red heifer. They failed to see Yeshua because Yeshua is the expression of his image. Yeshua is Yah. And he even faced death. He died. So in John 4:7-15, in this discourse with it's a reason for the statement by Paul in 1 Corinthians that says, for he that eateth and drinketh unworthily, eateth and drinketh damnation for himself, not discerning the Messiah's body. Chris.
That's what I was reading, sort of similar to that in 1 John, verse 5-7. It talks about the The message which we have heard of him and declare unto you that Yah is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Yeshua, the Messiah, his son, cleanses us from all sin.
Yeah,
So it's like it's kind of vice versa, like the unclean, like when you're saying that walking dead and then the unclean things, people think by what they do, right?
well, we know, he knows us by our works. He knows us by what we're doing. I believe there's even aroma to his bride. That, a whole nother message. I think I've referenced it before. But we are absolutely known for what we do. And when we tie ourselves with darkness, I'll go back to years ago where we had some of our youth at the time. They said, well, we're going to watch Twilight because they're Christian vampires.
How did they get that?
I don't remember. It's been so long ago. I mean, we had long talks afterwards, but that's how the world sees it. And you may say, well, books like Harry Potter and Twilight, those are simple. I'm sorry. We're to have nothing to do with darkness.
That's right.
What are we seeing? What are we watching? What are we reading? What are we listening to? Who are we hanging with? Are we commingling with darkness? Because then we've just touched dead bodies and we are unclean, just like you said, Chris.
Smith Wigglesworth did not allow anything pertaining to death into his home, including the newspaper, because it had stories of people that had died. It had the obituaries in it. It was not allowed in his home. Nothing. I mean, you weren't allowed to say anything. It was. I read the book I sent Jonathan, and I found it very interesting.
Does everybody know who Smith Wigglesworth is? Smith Wigglesworth was a mighty man of God. He's from England. Was he a plumber? I think he was.
Yeah, I think so.
I think he was a plumber, but he was the guy I think he was a guy. He was sort of gruff. You know, he wasn't all soft. And he's the kind of guy that threw a body up over a wall over and over and said, live, and it finally lived.
Wow.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yes.
Yeah, he threw him up there, and he also walked into a restaurant. Now, he was like head and shoulders, he was big. He walked into a restaurant and, okay, here's all these people in the middle of their meals. And at the top of his, he says, excuse me. He said, I don't believe everybody here has probably thanked the Lord for this food, so let's do it now. And
Oh, wow, that's great.
so-
Yeah, but you see, with this idea that both Chris and Twyla have said, to eliminate darkness from your life and let it not beckon your door, or don't commingle with it, don't rub up against it, don't play with it. What it shows us is that if we want a truly powerful walk with him, if we want to truly be that para adamah, that red heifer, the one that brings life, Yeshua is the red heifer, again, yes, but we are supposed to be that cleansing agent just as Adam was, okay? So if you're jumping in, I'm not saying we are the red heifer. We are not. Yeshua is the red heifer, but we are his body, and we have a function. So it is more powerful when we eliminate all the darkness from our life. How does it make you feel, even when if you're around somebody and all they are is negative, and all they are is everything they say is negative, whether it's the news or whether it's what's going on in the world, and et cetera, et cetera.
or if nothing else, they'll criticize themselves.
Criticize. Somebody criticizes all the time. Before you, Carlos, how does that make you feel? Does it make you feel like, ugh,
Yes.
ugh?
I
Carlos.
don't know if this comes to the point, but this is something that we were in, I think it does. Romans 12:1, and it says, I just read it, fine, I don't know why not. Sorry.
Go ahead, Romans 12:1.
Yes. I know. Wonderful. I can't find it.
Romans Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts.
Well,
4.
yeah, but he's
Oh, wait.
looking at his paper. He's looking.
Here.
Oh,
Romans 12:1. Well, while you're looking that up,
I've got it.
well, let Carlos read it since it was his.
I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service.
That's very good. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable for service. Can we be acceptable for service if we're walking around with the dead and darkness and uncleanness all over us?
No.
If we make excuses why it's okay? How many of you know or have ever done it yourself why it might be okay not to do the right thing, what the word says? Well, you know, I've been there. I've done it. Trying to convince
it won't
myself
matter
that it's
just this
okay.
one time.
Just this one time, it's not going to matter. Well, guess what? It's wrong.
Well, and I remember here a few months ago, I got up Sabbath morning to drive up here and I had not filled my gas tank. I always fill it on Wednesday or Thursday. I didn't fill it. And I sat there and I thought, what do I do? Do I buy gas and go to church? Or do I stay home and watch on TV? And I sat there for the longest time and finally I thought, okay, I'm just this once. But I have watched since then. I went ahead and got the gas and came on. But yesterday I was talking to somebody on the phone and I looked, I said, I gotta go, I gotta get gas and it's 5. So.
Chris, or Linda, who was first?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it was like the guy was telling me, well, Yeshua did this, he did that, he labored peace and was always around unclean people and this and that. And I was like, well, he went to them to heal them. He went to them to do miracles. He went to them to preach a message. But he never became the best friend. You know, he never said that he just dwelled with them, that started becoming part of him, right?
He went in and ministered to them.
Yep,
He touched their heart.
That was it.
And he usually would tell them, go and sin no more.
Exactly.
You know, so don't stay where you're at. You're forgiven, you know, don't keep doing it.
Separate from darkness. Separate. Get rid of it. You're a new person. We're a new creation. Always hear, well, that's not what I want to do. It's guess what? You've heard me say before, our life and what we want is irrelevant once we are joined with him. Once we accept him, it's about what he wants in us. And we pray, hey, Father, cause my desires to be the ones that you want for me to have. Let nothing else get in the way. So if we're mingling with death, where does that take us? Where do we have to be if we're mingling with death in that culture? In
Outside.
That way? We have to go outside the camp.
You're cut off quick.
You're cut off quickly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, mercy, they just give you leprosy for a little bit.
Oh, yeah. You got to go through a cleansing process. If we live carnal and we live lustful lives and we're carrying around the dead body of our own flesh because we refuse to be transformed, then guess where we belong? We belong outside the camp because we are forgetting the Torah that we become ineffectual and we fail to see Yeshua clearly. I hate this statement. Well, I'm just a sinner. No, you're not. If you're a new creation and you say I'm still a sinner, that's messed up,
You're
guys.
calling it that.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
That's like saying, well, it wasn't enough for you. I'm not redeemed enough. I got to call Yeshua back. It's not enough for me. No, you are not a sinner any longer.
My sin is way too big for you.
My sin is what, or I hear people say, well, when I stop sinning, I'll come and gather with the body. I'll come to church. I'm like, you're sinning because you're not gathering, because what happens if you come around and we get to surround you, that word brings forth life that cleansing agent as you hear his word and you're washed with that living water and you are changed and transformed. And all of a sudden, the friends that you're hanging around that become unattractive to you, disdainful to you even, and you begin to change your life. And there are a whole bunch of other things. But I hear these statements from people because when people don't want to gather, when they don't want to follow the word, any excuse is going to do, right?
Any fig leaf.
Yes. Any fig leaf, yes. Absolutely. Well,
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation.
That way you'll know what size fig leaf.
You know what I'm saying?
Big old tree.
we need the cleansing waters of the red heifer
Every day.
every day. Absolutely. We need Yeshua. We need what he's done. It says in Deuteronomy 31:18 says, I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they shall have wrought, if they are turned unto other gods. Now, many believe that is talking about the northern tribes, which it does to a point. But the pattern is that of Israel coming out of Egypt and returning to Torah. We see so many turning to Torah. We see others that are not and condemning it. While they're in the wilderness, we find that they're unbinding their hair and loosening the restraints. Because of that, the one who loosens the restraints has to die off. A whole generation had to die off because they didn't want to live out the word. Chris.
That's what it talks about in Ezekiel about the idolatry of the heart. You know, he wasn't talking about the images. He was talking about how they set up the idols of the heart. Anything that causes them to stumble before receiving the instruction or continuing in the instruction. I was reading that the other day. Man, it's deep, you know. They start asking the Father to show you those idolatries in the heart that we don't see.
Absolutely.
It's painful.
It is painful.
Yeah, very painful.
I want to say that for a season, we've been declaring out of our mouth that we're coming out of Egypt, that we were turning to Torah. But there in front of us is another season that unless we're very careful, that we're going to lose our vision and unbind our hair and connect with darkness, because it says that many will fall away. And if you fell away, what does that mean? You were once. But you were once. You were in at one point, right? So there means that there's possible that there are many in the house of Yah that call themselves the house of Yahweh, the believing community, that are going to be seduced and brought into deception because their vision will be clouded.
Die vision.
Some seducing spirit will overtake them, or some seducing event, some seducing teaching. I don't know what it is. It's a person, who knows? But something's going to happen. That's according to the word. Now, I'm going to go into a place that y'all are going to be freaked out for a minute. What month is this right now that we're studying this Torah portion? Does anybody know Hebrew month?
Adar?
Tammuz. Now, we always hear about Tammuz, how it's pagan and Babylonian. I'm not saying it's not, but we see it over that word in the Torah. So, could there be meaning behind it that we need to know and understand?
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah, we got two names like that.
There's always a good and a bad, right?
Yep.
Excuse me. So I want us to look at this word as we look at this word Tammuz, because when you say it, anytime I read it, I say it under my breath almost, because I'm like, oh, we're saying the names of other gods. But what if it's not necessarily all of that we need to be carrying with us? Because we do understand that Tammuz was it was used in Babylon. But maybe it's not pagan by nature, because the month of Tammuz, the fourth month in Hebrew, on the Hebrew calendar, is associated with Reuben. Okay, Reuben. Who is Reuben? He's the firstborn. He's one of the 12 tribes. and one of the constellations that we see in the heavens that we've talked about. And we see this month being associated with Reuben, and his name means behold a son. Now, it is said that this month is also connected to vision, to sight. Oh my goodness, do we hear how this word is coming up again? Is it possible that we're being warned now about how we see the Son of Yah, that we need to see him clearly so that we don't get off track? And why do I say that? I was talking with Linda and was talking about a congregation here in Amarillo who once was chasing down the Torah and chasing Yah, and then all of a sudden something happened, and how they saw Yeshua changed. Then he became a man, only a man, and they converted all to Judaism. The whole congregation converted to Judaism.
The ones that stay.
The ones that stayed, many left. But see, their vision was clouded. Their picture of Yah, their picture of Yeshua had become clouded. Behold the Son. The rabbis say that this month is a month associated with sight. Yes, we understand that. But what happens when we can't see clearly any longer? Here we have Reuben. Behold. What?
We don't know where we're going.
You don't know where you're going. Or worse yet, you think you know because you don't realize your vision's clouded.
A headless chicken.
A headless chicken. That's right. Because when we look at this, we see clear vision of the sun, and it's the month that's pointing towards what? We just got through with the spring festivals. We're in this month, and it's pointing towards the fall festivals that are coming, which are all pictures of Yeshua and what he's going to do. Behold the sun. Tammuz, Reuben. Okay, there's more. This parsha about this firstborn of Israel, this generation who came out of Egypt, all died except, well, I've actually done in Torah portion before. I actually named the number. There's more than 2, but officially everybody died but Caleb and Joshua, right? Okay. Why?
Only the 2 that didn't die, didn't come back to the father.
The 2 that didn't align themselves with death. Yeah. They couldn't go in. They couldn't go into the land. They had to stay outside.
Outside the camp.
Outside, so to speak. Yes. We have to be really careful how we weigh Yah's word and how we show judgment, because in a way, when we look at this, it's an indictment of leadership, because did Aaron or Miriam or Moshe get to enter? No. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things I'd like to talk about as to reasons why, but just based on this right now, Joshua and Caleb, these 2 names, Joshua is the same Hebrew word for Yehoshua, or Yahweh is my salvation. And Caleb, I'm sorry, I heard this a couple weeks ago in Torah portion. Caleb, they say means dog. Who's going to name their kid dog? Hey, come here, dog. I'm sorry. Just like Jacob and the people who translate his name meaning, I do not believe that's what it's supposed to mean at all. No.
That would be very rude there.
Come here. Your kid would be like, your kid would not like you for that, probably for a while. But this word Caleb, if we look at it here, we see what is Lev? Can you tell me, anybody? Caleb, that means after, like come after. And Lev is heart. So if you break that apart, what do you have? It's a heart that's following after. A man who follows after the heart of God. That's more like what his name should mean. Following the heart of Yahweh. And we're able to see that with these guys, Yahushua, the salvation in the heart of the Father, chasing after the heart of God. That's what these guys' names mean, and that's what they experienced, and that's why they didn't associate themselves with death. Chris.
I got a question. What we were reading yesterday, doing what we do on Shabbat, but would it be wrong for us to say, okay, we know we use Yahweh and Yah, right, and Yeshua, and I said Yah, and I put Yeshua. Would that be wrong to say it like that? Okay, and I don't want to get myself in trouble.
No, not at all.
Just making sure.
Not at all.
Oh, yes, it is.
Okay, so Tammuz. It's spelled with the tav, a mem, a vav, and a zayin, or zadi. The tav prefix hints at a third person, which is future tense. He shall, we shall, they shall, she shall. So future tense, okay. The root of that word, that mem, and the vav and the zayin, is believed to originate from mazeh, which means burned out, washed, exhausted, worn out, in particular for famine. So what it's saying here is you shall become exhausted and worn out in the coming famine. The famine hits at a time when people will perish because there's no vision. People perish for lack of vision, for lack of knowledge. There's no word. There's no word of God. There's no word of Yah. That's what we see in this word. It's like this warning. Our people are going to perish because they can't see anymore. They shall. It's future tense. Is there a coming time where people will perish and have perished for a lack of the word, the lack of the knowledge of Yah, a lack of vision?
Yes.
There's a famine of the word. Famine, in other words, during the month of Tammuz, if you're careful, Tammuz is this season. It's after the initial harvest that I just talked about. And we're looking towards those fall festivals. Yah's telling us something between now and then, this interim, that right now we need to behold the sun. We need to make sure that we have a grasp on who Yeshua is and who we are in Yeshua, because the months are coming where all about him. The festivals are coming. We're in this time. We need to get our life right. Make sure we see clearly. Make sure we see clearly. Amos 8:11 says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Yehovah, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, not a famine thirst for water, but of hearing the word of Yah." A famine of hearing the word of Yah, that we can't even hear it. So if we are no longer able to allow to hear the word of God, what should we be doing right now when we hear the word of God? Cherishing it and storing it up in our hearts and our minds. What if there's coming a day where nobody's allowed to say anything that has to do with the word, that you're not able to gather, that you're not able to even own a Bible? Well, we better have heard and cherished and put that word in our hearts and our lives, because there may be a day where you can't. I remember stories of people from other countries. They get excited if they have a little piece of one page of the Bible. They hold on to it and grasp it. We take it for granted. We take gathering for granted. You know, we should be gathering now. We should be gathering now, because there may be a day and an hour where we're not allowed by penalty of death. We should look forward to gathering every time we possibly can, because we may not be able to someday. We may not be able to gather with our brother and our sister and find out what is being said. Now, Yah can make a way. He's done that before. People will travel miles and miles and sit in a service for 12 or 15 hours because it doesn't happen very often. We complain because it's too hot, too cold, too long. You have to drive here, have to do that. It's inconvenient. I'm tired. I'm thirsty. I'm whatever. Terry.
I believe it was during the Holocaust. I had read about one of the prisoners that was put on latrine duty, and he noticed one of the pieces of paper that had been used to wipe with had writing on it, and it looked familiar, so he washed it off. It was a page out of a Bible. And so he started sifting through the feces to see
If there was more.
if there were more, and there were.
Wow.
And that's how the Father got his word into some of the places that the Germans thought that they'll never see this.
How many of us would be so hungry and consider the word so precious that we would sift through hoop to get it? I mean, seriously.
When I was locked up going through some things, when it was time to eat, to me, I didn't want to eat. I would go in my cell and I called that eating because it satisfied my soul in a way to where I didn't see what was on the outside of the cell. You know? And I guess, now that I've been out, I've been eating a lot. But sometimes I feel that If I don't read, I don't have what I need throughout the day for nourishment to the soul. So I have to every day. I have to. It's a must that I read and be able to. Like when I read, I talk to my wife in the morning. After I read, that's how I get mine through. Through the day with food. But I'll eat here before I eat what she cooks for me for breakfast.
You're such a testimony.
He is.
You are
isn't
such
he?
a testimony, Chris.
His whole family.
Yeah, all of you. You're such a blessing. You're such a blessing to all of us.
Amen.
That is so good. So here we have Tammuz. We're about to end this part, go to something else, but we have Tammuz is actually speaks prophetically towards what's coming up, the 7th month of Tishri and the festivals Yom Kippur or Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So that's what we have when we look at this word. So maybe when we see this word in scripture, you can look at it a little bit differently. I'm not saying that the other meaning is completely eliminated. I'm saying that things can be redeemed, right? That God uses it. So I was going to say one more thing, not about Tammuz, but let me see if I can find it. I wanted to just understand that when we've already, I think we looked at Hebrews 9:13, but when we sin and defile this temple, we still have to take the same measures and make the temple clean again through sacrifice. The key is that we need to plead that sacrifice each and every time we sin. We need Yeshua. We need his blood. One and done, I don't think is necessarily the mantra we need to be holding to. Hey, I did it. I did it back then. I don't need to ask forgiveness ever again.
That's what's happening today.
It is what's happening today. I accepted Yeshua or Jesus as my Savior. That's all I need. I'm good. Everything that's good to me. Yeah, Chris.
That's what the guy told me the other day. He said, I received Jesus. I received the freedom and all that. He said, you want to walk on eggshells? You walk on eggshells, but I don't have to, because he says that our instructions are eggshells. We have to walk on eggshells because he hasn't received the blessing of understanding, because I call it a blessing to understand even just a little bit, So, but yeah, he told me that. He said, you can walk on eggshells if you want to and all this stuff, but he believes that he can make a Sabbath of every day. Every day's a Sabbath.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I've heard people say that before.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which day you worship the Lord, as long as you're worshiping him.
Doesn't matter what day you
to
celebrate
y'all.
my birthday. Doesn't matter what day you celebrate my anniversary as long as you do it.
I got one more thing too.
I know.
Because this was in that conversation. If you go into okay, we know how we read King James, and some read the New, some read the Hallelujah, and some read the Answer. But in the NLT, in Luke 23, I think there's 54 to 56, these people that made this Bible will not deny God's Sabbath. Because in the verse 24, it'll say, and on Sunday, first day of the week, it'll say because they've already accepted their Lord's Day, but they won't deny the Father's Sabbath in this new NLT Bible. It'll say it plain as day, Sunday. Right after it'll talk about preparation and then how they had to keep the fourth commandment, and then it'll say, and on Sunday, she went early in the morning too. So I just thought that was awesome. I caught that the other day.
That's good.
I'm looking through my brother's Bible. I'm like, hey.
Well, bottom line is when we sin, we need to repent, plead the blood of Yeshua, make restitution, whatever needs to be done, make things right with the pure water of the word. Now, let's see how much time I have to sparse out. Not much. Okay. Miriam perishes in the wilderness. Miriam played an important role in the fulfillment of Yah's promise to bring Israel out of Egypt. And we know she wasn't perfect. She was stricken with Zarat. We know, have we all failed? Have we all messed up? Yes.
Yeah.
Now, did Miriam play a part in the mourning, mourning of Moshe, even a part of his anger? I believe so. I believe that did play a part. I want us to look at some words and see if we can better understand what may have been happening to everything at the time. Because Miriam, there's actually a play on words in this verse because the word for rebels is marah. Can you hear Miriam, marah? Can you hear that it's going to be similar in form? And it's actually the way it's written in the Hebrew text is morim. Morim and Miriam, it's the same letters. Wow, rebel has the same letters as, hi kids, has the same letters as Miriam. So what does that mean? Well, Miriam is said to mean bitterness or rebellion, or even from marah, to oppose. And it's also related to enlarge, expand. But guess what Miriam, guess what yam means? See, S-E-A. So what did she do? What's one of the things she did? Miriam led the song by the sea. Absolutely. Now there's a legend that a well of water followed Israel, or a rock followed. Some say a rock, some say a well. Can't say yay or nay to that, but there's something in connection with Miriam that did happen, because we read in Isaiah 12:3, therefore with joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation, Yeshua. Now, what was Miriam? Miriam was the oldest sister of Aaron. She was a prophetess. She was following him at an early age. She was righteous by an early age. And she courageously confronted her own father, who had separated from her mother as a result of Pharaoh's wicked decree to kill the newborn boys. And Miriam understood the truth that the relationship with Yahweh is dependent upon the circumstances, personal life. It's not dependent upon those things. That we should serve Yah regardless of whatever situation we find ourselves in. Now, tradition says that she died on the 10th of Aviv. Can anybody tell me what the 10th of Aviv is?
What is?
The 10th of Aviv? It's the day you bring in the lamb. Okay. There you go. There's another piece of something you can. She died on the 10th of Aviv. Anyway, that's what tradition says.
That's pretty wild.
It is the day that the Passover lamb is brought in. It is wild. Now, it's said that Moses might have been thinking about his sister and the role she played in Israel, what she did for the nation, what she did for the people. Because the leadership was threefold, guys. It was Aaron, it was Moshe, and it was Miriam. It wasn't just the two guys or just Moshe himself. The leadership was of three. And we see that role even of Yeshua. Yeshua, when he's acting as the Father, the Son, the Spirit. Remember, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, etc., etc. But sometimes I only play one of those roles at a time. And Yeshua also has different roles that he plays too. Different things. His names even describe what he is, what he does. So let's look at Numbers 20:13 says, those were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contend with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. Now remember, I already said the same spelling of rebel in Miriam. I'm not saying Miriam was rebel, not at all, but it's bringing us to remembrance of what she is and what she stands for. And then we have the waters of Meribah. We hear that same phrasing, Miriam, Meribah, Miriam, Mori. Do you hear it? Because Meribah can be read Meribah, which means Miriam. That is, Miriam is in the waters of contention. So Meribah means strife or contention. It's a legal term as well. And it means to conduct a case or a legal suit, specifically a covenant lawsuit. So here we are, the waters of Meribah. They sort of stand with us as this warning, warning, warning. Here's where people are rebelling. People are rebelling. Why? Why are they rebelling? Well, the Hebrew word here is hamorim, literally the rebels. If you remove the definite article, you're left with the same letters of Miriam. Now, I think when we look at it by the word, it shows us that one whose death was marked the end of water. Now, what can water symbolize?
Life.
Life. What else?
People.
Okay. The spirit. It's been said that that moray also alludes to teacher. So if you listen, it's almost to say, listen, you who think you are to teach your teacher. Listen, you who think you are to teach your teacher. Marah. Moses was talking with disgust when he was calling them rebels. Listen, you who think you are to teach your teacher. Listen to you. You know, Yah's placed me in a position where I'm leading you, and I have to bear that responsibility and the consequences if I mess up. I mean, he's angry, and you think you're going to teach me? He's sitting here and he's acting because here they are doing the same sort of thing over. Whoa, if we're complaining about this, we're complaining about that. We're complaining. I can tell you, in frustration, I felt that before. I've had somebody come up and say, tell Pastor John and I, I don't think you should pray so long. I don't think you should have practice and worship. I don't think you should, it was like 15 things. So you guys pray too long. You should never have practice on Shabbat. You should not let other people speak in your congregation. Yeah, we had that one. Yeah. And of course, you guys know we don't believe that way. It's the body that ministers to the body. And there's lots more that they had this. And I in frustration, I could see John was more frustrated than I. And I was like, but those thoughts came out of my mind. John and I have been pastoring since 1991. I have been in leadership in ministry since 1986. I'm basically, yeah. And I'm like, we haven't come by this just willy-nilly by the seat of our pants. It's because we've been seeking God and saying, hey, what do you want? How do you want us to do things? What do you want? For years. John and I were first ordained as pastors been ministering since 1991. We were ordained in 2000 in another name. I can't think of the word I want, but assembly, yes.
What was that one chapter you said? Numbers something. It was in regards to Miriam.
Miriam, let me back up and see if I can find it.
12:13.
Is it?
Numbers 20:13.
2013.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But here we have Moses getting, he's talking to the rebels that are, trying to tear things apart, complaining, griping. Meribah. Those were the waters of Meribah because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. Who does it say they contended with them when they were contending with Moses?
The Lord.
Ow. It says in the word, do not touch mine anointed, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Ouch. So here we have this idea of this strife and contention in these rebels, and it's associated with water. Well, I'm going to summarize because there's something I want to get to. So here, when we look at the waters dried up. And it is said that Miriam also played this part in that she was an intercessor. Just as Moses interceded for the people, Miriam, as that representative of the woman of valor, also stood in the gap. She took away some of the harshness. I'm just talking to you about some of the tradition.
In that Proverbs 31.
Yeah, that Proverbs 31 woman, which is also the bride. But it says since they worked as a unit of three, when Miriam was gone, then things didn't function as they should function or quite as they once did. When Jonathan left, initially, because John and Jonathan and myself worked so much together. Yes, he wasn't a pastor or anything, but I'm telling you, he did a lot of the dirt work around here. And he was very much a help. And sometimes Jonathan could see more clearly things than I could, because I have this tendency to say, well, let's give him another chance. You know, let's come from their perspective and try to understand. And he would come at me and he'd say, Mom, I see this, and this is what's going on in the spirit, and this is what's going on in the natural. The Lord told me once he was at Bible school in college, at Kansas City, called me up on the phone and he said, so-and-so and so-and-so is doing this in your congregation. They need to leave. You need to take care of it. And I said, no, you don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. Let's give him a chance. He's going through stuff. Well, guess what? 6-7 months later, Jonathan, the Lord showed him that he had strings attached to him and he was pulling strings. It was a vision, a prophetic vision that he gave him. Well, we ignored Jonathan. Again, we've done it several times. And he was doing exactly that. He would be with our kids. He'd take the youth out. We had him in position as working with our youth. And he would find out about their families and prophesy it on service time. And then he would speak against John and I. In fact, every time I got on stage, I would feel like because he had an amazing voice. Amazing. I would feel like I couldn't speak. I felt like I wasn't good enough, like I should shut up, that I shouldn't sing, I shouldn't do anything. And it got worse and worse. And I found out by people that he had talked to later that he was actually praying to get doing all sorts of things. Jonathan was 100% right. So when he left, he still can function that way, even just as he did in Kansas City from where he's at. But he still played a part. When Miriam left, do you think there was a hole?
Yes.
Right. There was a hole. And people reacted accordingly. And Moses reacted accordingly because he didn't have a sister there. He didn't have her there. And he acted out of anger. Maybe he didn't quite deal with the people correctly. When it comes to dealing with people, who's usually better, women or men? Women. What? And we don't know the exact roles, and there's more to it. I'm skipping through a lot of it. I had like 7 pages. My notes are 52 pages long today, so.
Well, also didn't Melissa and Eddie both say when she died, they did not have the proper time?
Yes, I was going to say that. They never had mourning. They never had they mourned with Aaron. They mourned with Moshe. They never mourned with Miriam.
Yeah,
and it is said, some say that she died in, this is year 40, and some say she died in 38. All I know is that people are still acting and reacting from this, and Moshe is included in that. And he struck the rock. And we've talked about that a lot, and because of time, we're not going to get into that today. So snakes. I do want to talk about snakes for a minute, though.
Yeah.
Let's talk about snakes.
Slithering snakes.
Okay. Now, I've given you a lot of the Hebrew on that. The snake itself, you can read through your notes and look at the Hebrew and look it up for yourselves. Never believe a word anybody says to you, ever. You go look it up for yourself. Because we know that snakes were sent into the camp. And you may say, why would God send snakes into the camp?
Because of the Lashon Hara that you will come.
Well, there is Lashon Hara, but I think that there's even more to it than that, because the word there is, let me find where I have it. I'm paging down my notes, so. Okay. Because there's something about snakes that we need to really say, okay, what's up with that? Because Hirsch, and I have a quote, I think I included a quote at the end of your notes from him maybe. maybe not, but her says that sending the snakes was actually trying to get the people's attention so that they realized that they weren't completely self-reliant. And I want to follow that path for a minute, because how often do we dismiss what God is doing in our lives, what he's done in our lives? We forget that he was the one that authored it. We forget that he's the one that performed that miracle. We forget that he's the one that's sustaining us. We forget that he's the one that brings forth the food on our table, the water to drink. We forget he's the one that's called us to gather. We forget that it's by his hand that everything has happened. See, Israel at this time had just seen a glimpse of Edom, in that they had heard of a city that was right there where the people were prospering and that life was normal, that they could eat what they want. They didn't have to eat the bread that fell from heaven, that they could live and act as a regular country, as a regular nation. And they got this glimpse, and then they had to walk around Edom. And then there was a lack of water. There was a lack of the word of Yah. There was a lack of the living word. They were pulling away from what they should in the connection with Yahweh. And all of this, and they begin to gripe and complain. They are different than their forefathers because they did repent. And then they asked Moses to intercede where they should have contacted Yah himself. That's another story. And here we have these snakes. So is there a connection with self-reliance in these snakes? Now, God didn't actually send the snakes. If we look at the word, let me see if I can find it. It basically says, and it's going to be there probably when I'm not looking. It basically says that he released the snakes. He took his hand. He was holding back the snakes, because are there snakes in the desert?
Yes. And scorpions.
So why weren't they being bitten any time of the 40 years? Because
God was holding them back.
God's holding them back. I always think about this nation. I believe that this nation has been protected for some time because Yah's hand of protection has been over it. But he's removing his hand. It's partially removed, and if not, it's going to be completely removed soon. His hand, it's not that he's sending stuff on us. No, he said, you say you don't want me around? Have you ever said that to your kid? Your kid says, well, this and this and this. And you say, fine, you do it on your own. And they find out life's a lot harder because you were a source for them of so much more that they didn't even realize. You paid their bills, you fed them, you trained them, you loved them, you took care of them, you cleaned up their messes, and yet they are ungrateful and they just spit in your face and spew all this stuff and act accordingly. Has that ever happened? I think it's happened to us all. And you finally say, okay, let me show you. Well, here we have this sort of thing happening. One more time, they're griping and complaining. And as we said at the beginning of the Torah portion, towards Moses, but what does the word say? It was towards God when you were acting in that way, in that manner. So is there a connection to somewhere else in the word where it talks about snakes? And that, yes, there is. Because the word that God sends the snakes, the word in the Torah used is not is the typical word, which means to send. It's the word that means to let go, to release, which means God didn't send the snakes. He didn't command them to go attack the people. He let them go. He opened their cages. He set them free. The snakes were always there. That off the path of righteousness, there's always chaos. They are things that can destroy us. Like a lion held in a cage in a coliseum, when the cage doors open, he goes and attacks. So we've got to ask ourselves, is there another place in the Torah that has parallels to this story? And there is in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Let's go there. Verses 11 through 20. And I'm going to read it pretty fast. And the reason I'm going to read it is because, well, I may read part of it, but I want you guys to spend time and read it all. Because the Israelites are standing here at the borders of Israel, and Moshe gives them this warning before they enter. He says, when you settle the land, You have all the food you want. You have all the things you want. You have your crops, you have your cattle, you have your gold, you have your silver. You're going to be tempted to forget who I am. You're going to be tempted to forget who is your source. In Deuteronomy verses 11 through 20, I'm going to start at verse 14 though. Then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and its thirsty ground where there was no water. He who brought you water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness it was he who fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and in order to put you in the test, to do good for you to the end. Otherwise you may in your heart say, my power and my strength, my hand has made me well. But you are to remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you the power to make wealth in order to confirm his covenant, which he swore to your father as it is this day. And it shall come about it, if you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and serve and worship them, I testify against you today that you will certainly perish like the nations that the Lord eliminates from you. So you shall perish because you did not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. How often do we forget? Because he is really the one who gives us the strength to do what we need to do and to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And when we credit in our own selves or anyone else for our healing, anyone else for our deliverance, then we have sinned against him. We have forgotten it was he who is our source. And that's why we have snakes here, because all of a sudden snakes show up and the people are basically have to remember. So you thought you thought that all I did was provide manna and water for you? Let me move my hand and let's see what else is out there that you're going to have to face when I'm not there. And there's snakes. You think that's all I did for you? Okay. Let's watch the show and see what happens. I'll remove my hand of protection. I'll remove my hand of protection, and you have to live with what you see, what you experience. Snakes, scorpions. See, Moshe mentions snakes in Deuteronomy and Devarim as one of the many terrifying dangers. It's almost like when these snakes happen here, when we read of these, we're supposed to put these scriptures together in Deuteronomy and here in Numbers. Because snakes are native to a desert. Guess what's native to the world around us that's not been subdued? Evil, danger, darkness. It's native. When we play with darkness, are we going to get bitten?
Yep.
So to speak. Yes. And the only reason they had 40 years without the tormentors, without the snakes, without the bites, without that death, was because God held his hand. And the Torah says, Yah Yeshalach, God released the snakes. Yahweh released the snakes. He withdrew his protection. So why did Yah punish the people by withdrawing his protection? Well, as I said, because he wants the people to know how much they relied on him. Just because we have food on our table doesn't mean we provided it. Just because food's not falling from the sky anymore, it's going to come from the ground, doesn't mean that God's still not involved. Yeah, they could see the miracle when the bread fell from heaven. They could taste it. But is any less of a miracle that we get to eat and have food on our table and water to drink in a house that we get to have our family in and clothes on our body and schools to go to, etc.? Is that any less of a miracle?
No.
No, it's still the hand of God. It's still the hand of God. And he's wanting to remind us that if he withdraws, that our life will change drastically. The Israelites had turned away from Edom. As I said, it was their first encounter with civilization. This whole thing really wasn't about food. They were frustrated with their circumstances. How many times have you been frustrated with your circumstances and something happens and you use that, and not even consciously necessarily, but all of a sudden you blow up over this issue, but it's the root of it. If you look back, the real issue where your heart is discontent is over here, and then everything else just you just explode over it. But the root goes back further. The root goes back to they weren't happy with their circumstance. They weren't happy. They had a vision of what they wanted, and it wasn't happening quite as quickly as they thought it should. They couldn't walk through Edom. They had to walk around. They were almost there. They almost could taste and see life change where they were no longer completely dependent upon him, when they could take control. But God doesn't want us to take control. He wants us to stay completely dependent upon him. Why snakes? So that we can remember who we are and who he is. He's trying to show the people the whole reason for their excitement in the first place, their eagerness to be self-sufficient, was a false premise. How often do we think we are self-sufficient and we don't need help? Or somebody offers you help, you really need it, you go, no, I can do it myself. I say that. I can say this because I say that. And I need help. What, Chris?
Me too.
God, yeah. I'm self-sufficient. I can do it myself. Well, you're not supposed to. You were never supposed to. Self-sufficiency is an illusion. Real self-sufficiency is an illusion. God is so much more. They weren't thinking about snakes. That sideswiped them. What in our life, we weren't thinking about whatever happened. It just sideswiped us upside the head, and we are completely taken aback. Whether it's disease or sickness. It's Andy. But we go around and think that it's all about us. Look what I did. Look, I grew this garden. Look, I got this job. Look, I made a way. Look, I know how to preach or teach. I can't do any of it. I can't do any of it. I can't do any of it. It's only through him, by him, and in him that I can accomplish anything. It's only by his hand on my garden that it's growing. It's only by his hand that I have provision and food on my table. If he removes his hand of protection in my life, I am nothing. What about you guys?
Same here.
Self-sufficiency is an illusion. And we live in a country where self-sufficiency is put on a pedestal. They did it all by themselves. Well, who gets glory if you do it?
Yah doesn't.
Yah doesn't get the glory. We like to take glory for ourselves, don't we? We like to get puffed up. Yeah, that was me. I did that. I accomplished that.
Pull myself up on my bootstraps.
The only reason you were able to get up off of your bootstraps is because he pulled you there. He took you out of the miry clay. Chris.
When you talk like that, man, people start looking at you crazy. You know, because you say it with confidence, because you know, but they don't, you know. They look at you like crazy. Crazy.
But how many times have we come under the illusion that it was all us. It all falls on us. Working that job, putting in those hours, making sure that there's food on the table because of what you do. Making sure that things are taken care of because of what you do.
I fell into that for a little bit.
I think we've all fallen into that because it's not us. We have to put everything upon him and then follow his word, follow his way, and remember that we are completely dependent upon who he is. That we may go through our job and do it as unto him to give him glory and to be a witness and so much more. But that job that we even have is a gift from him. And we may hate it and we may gripe about it, but we shouldn't because it's a gift from him. And then we pray that God sends us a new job if we're supposed to be somewhere else. We're not effective in that place. But he's just going to use that job to provide, but he is ultimately the provider. Your job is your seed source to give. That's it. He's your provider. And that's what Israel needs to learn here, that he ultimately is their provision. He ultimately is who they need to look to. We are not enough. We have to actively try to bring that sense of relying on Yah back into our lives. And remember that he is our strength. He is our song. He is the one we look to. He is Yeshua is that red heifer who we rely upon to cleanse us and make us pure so that we can join with him as the body and have clear vision and be light in the midst of darkness, and that we can go where he tells us to go and make the world around us look more like him, because when we walk in the room, we are bringing his presence in, because that's our responsibility. And we can't do it in our own strength. We got to rely on him. Fill me with your spirit, Father. Fill me with your spirit. Put your word in my mouth and cause me to be your hands and feet in all that I do, and not rely on my own strength to accomplish any of this, because it is him, in him, by him, and through him alone. Otherwise, he'll bring our snakes into our camp and we'll be sideswiped by something we didn't even expect, because we were taking the glory or giving his healing or something credit to somebody else, or giving our accomplishment to somebody else, whether it's ourselves or something else. You guys, do you have anything you want to say on any of it? Great. Carlos, did you have something? No?
Good. Yes. Good.
All right. Okay. That means we are at the end of this time, our part 2 of our service. Well, I guess, yeah. Well, we're going to meet at 3. We have worship practice right now. And so I'm going to have to leave here. And I hope to see you guys back with us at 3 o'clock. And until then, to that time, shalom. We love you, and thank you for being a part of this family. Shalom.
Good job, Sandy.